programmers! Welcome music lovers! Welcome to Code and Coda! We're back. It's been a couple weeks. Good to see you again. We are streaming live from Boston, Massachusetts this evening. My name is Joseph Parzel. I'm a software developer and an app publisher. I got my learning on down at Clemson University down in South Carolina. Go Tigers! Hello to my friends down in South Carolina. And of course, on music tonight, the most important part of the show, as we all know, is our good friend Eric Gaudette playing guitar and piano this evening. Sounds great as always, Eric. Thank you. Let's jump right into it. Here is our abstract for Season 2. If this is your first time joining us in Season 2, well, thanks for coming back. You might recognize our good friend Eric on guitar, but he's also playing the keyboards now. Throwing that into the mix. I hope it sounded good for everybody out there. Tonight, we are in episode 3, which is the continuation of our build episode. Here's the technical specification for today's episode. Of course, we'll go through a quick introduction to Code and Coda, have some current events to talk about real quick, and do a 5-minute recap of last episode, a race against the clock, a race against Alexa. If you'd like to join the Code and Coda team, don't forget, you've probably seen the button on the new and improved Code and Coda website. There is a way to join our team, and that's because what we are trying to do is get our viewers to make some contributions to the show, and the way you can do that is by writing some code. Or if you just are here to hang out and listen to some music, that's good too. Feel free to send us a message in YouTube chat and let the others know that we are jamming it out here on a Sunday night. In the rest of the episode, we'll go ahead and finish up what we started last time, which was the get high scores process, and basically with the advice, using the advice of a good friend, we are going to switch our code from OpenXML to closed XML. This way we'll be able to start generating a nicely formatted response to the intent request, which is get high scores. We'll also work a little bit more on the game menu, but I will be spending a lot of time today talking about the game flow and how the game works, basically. How the player plays the game, goes through each round of the game. We'll talk about that a little bit, and we'll also talk about how to create an algorithm for generating a pretty important piece of information for the game. Lastly, before we leave for the evening, we'll get started with another piece of our solution, which is just to create a simple class for our briefcase. And that's because our briefcase is part of the game, so we'll create a briefcase object in C#. And we'll get started on creating a list of briefcases which will represent our game board. Before we get started with today's episode, let's do a quick introduction. Why Code and Coda? Well, this was my Teams Thursday presentation. And since Teams Thursday was canceled, well, we decided to put those slides online with some great music in the background, of course. just slides with no music is pretty boring, so we have Eric here helping us. And as my friend Jim Wilcox likes to say, cool kids catch it live for awesome code tips. Cooler kids join for the music, and the coolest kids dig for both. We hope you're digging it. Here are some current events. Granite State Code Review Nightly each evening at 9 p.m. If you would like to get more information about that meetup, check out meetup.com. The call for speakers is open for Granite State Code Camp, which will be a virtual event this year in November. I've spoken at Granite State Code Camp before. I did an Azure presentation. And something I found out today, which was pretty neat, is that Microsoft Ignite is this month in a couple of weeks. And that quote is from the Ignite website. Here you go, just in case you wanted to see on meetup.com, you can just type in Granite State Code Review. You'll see the next meetup is tomorrow, Monday the 7th. Here are some other current events. I'm trying to add a little bit more to this, and actually with some help from Eric, I'll be adding some music to the current events. One thing to note is the band Into It Over It has released a single called We Prefer Indoors. It sounded pretty neat. Eric likes that band a lot. Thinks that we should all go check that out. I know that I have some friends out there that are really into some music, so if you want to try something new, check out Into It Over It. That's a recommendation from Eric. Live music going on, but there is some virtual live music events. We're going to do our best to try and get some more information on these slides, but nothing much going on right now in the baseball world, however. Everybody's favorite team in New England still has a chance to make the playoffs, apparently. According to ESPN.com, a 0.3% chance of Boston making the playoffs this year. Yikes. And for you astronomy lovers, Neptune will be in opposition on September 11th. I didn't know what that meant, so I looked it up. Basically, it just means it's going to be on the other side of the Earth, opposite of the Sun, and closest to the Earth that it will be all year. So if you have a telescope, check it out. You might also see on this current events slide, I do have some questions here. 4 questions to be exact, and that is because I've created a current events survey. If you'd like to participate, just go to codeandcoda.com and fill out a survey. I'll have the results at the end of the episode. Thought that might be a little bit fun. Before you fill out that survey, thought you might like to see a picture of Pluto. One of the questions on the survey is Pluto a planet? Well, I guess it depends on when you went to school. Let's get started with this recap from last time. Don't forget, if you have one of these Amazon devices within earshot of Code and Coda, we suggest that you press that mute button on your device. Here we go with Alexa. Alexa, how are you?
I'm really good. Oops. I meant to say I'm really good. Guess I've been saying too many tongue twisters.
Okay, I didn't hear what you said. I forgot to turn her back up from last time. So let's see if she wants to tell us a joke. Alexa, music joke, please.
What do you call a rapper that needs to mail a letter? Post Office Malone.
Not bad. Not bad. Post Office Malone. Okay. Well, let's get to our recap before Alexa says anything we don't want to hear live on the air. So here we go. Alexa, set timer 5 minutes.
5 minutes, starting now.
Okay, great. Thank you,
By the way,
Alexa.
time goes faster with music on. Just say, Play music.
Wow, Alexa just said, just so you know, time goes faster with the music on. Well, we know that already. That's why we created Code and Coda. Because music makes everything great, doesn't it? Especially when Eric's playing, but hey. Here we go, back to the recap. Well, I showed you how to join the Code and Coda Teams site, and that's just another Microsoft forum there you can find on codeandcoda.com. Of course, we went through creating a new skill on the Alexa dashboard, the developer console, created a new skill, connected that new skill to the existing Azure endpoint that was created from last season. You can see here I just copied and pasted that URL to the new skill. We named the new skill Code or Coda because that's our new game, Code or Coda. And with this new skill, I've started adding some people to the debuggers list of the skill. And I'm not really talking about these slides too much because this is a lot of just button clicks and boring information. We added some intents to the skill. One intent we added was high scores, and that's because we wanted a way for the user to get the high scores of the game. So after adding that high scores intent, we go to the test tab, and this is something I've actually fixed since last time we run the Code or Coda launch request invocation phrase. Nothing really happened, but it is connected to our web application. We realized we can come in here to the skill settings and updated our skill logo with the new Code or Coda logo. And like I mentioned before, added some users to the beta testers list. If you would like to become a beta tester and add Code or Coda to your Alexa device, go ahead and click on that Join the Code or Coda Team button on the Code and Coda website. The next part of the last episode, we talked about OpenXML a little bit and all of the different classes that are required to utilize that library. And the reason we are using OpenXML is because our database for high scores is contained in an Excel spreadsheet, which is pretty much the easiest way to create a database in your solution. You just copy that spreadsheet to a folder in your solution, and just like that, you have a database that you can reference and update. I went through the process of committing these changes to GitHub because this solution is available in GitHub. It's because I want y'all out there to help me write some code. And we looked at the get high scores function that we created, which was basically a lot of OpenXML code. It took a long time to get through. Whoops. And just so you can see, here's our code from last time, creating workbook parts and sheets and sheet data. Lots and lots of boring code. But we're going to change that a little bit this week because we'll be using closed XML instead of OpenXML. Here you can see we're going through our switch statement in our C# that shows the user has invoked the high scores intent. And after calling our function, you can see that what was returned was information from the spreadsheet, which is still quite hard to navigate using OpenXML. So, as I mentioned, for today's episode, we will be using a different library called closed XML. We'll come back and get started on part one just after this, but first let's go ahead and take one quick peek back in at Eric. You can probably hear I forgot to turn Alexa off. So let's go ahead and do that. Alexa, stop timer. Alright, that was good timing. There's our logo for Code and Coda. Remember that from last time? Our number one contributor since last episode is Bob. Even though no code was written, Bob did give me the suggestion for using closed XML, so we'll give him number one credits for this week. If you would like to contribute code to the solution, don't forget you can visit GitHub and grab the solution. You can see these are the changes that I just committed today. One important piece here. You can see that we are now referencing closed XML. So let's take a look at how we did that. Well, it's important to note that closed XML is built on top of open XML, but it is not a Microsoft library. It is a library, and I should have made a note of who created the library here. We'll see in just a second. But it was created by a team of people that are not associated with Microsoft. However, it is an MIT license, which means it can be used for any project as long as you give credit to that library. And it's open source, available on GitHub. Now, the thing also to remember with closed XML is that it only works for spreadsheets, not Word documents or other types of Office documents that OpenXML would work with. But since we are working with a spreadsheet for our Code or Coda game database, then we can use closed XML, and we'll see how much easier it is to use that library as opposed to OpenXML. A quick glance back at our database here. This is the spreadsheet that's in the solution. I've added one extra column there on the left-hand side. That's a date column. And that's just to keep track of when each high score was added to the spreadsheet into the database. I figured each player would have more than one value in here, so it'd be neat to see when that high score was achieved and save that information in our database. Here we jump into Visual Studio, and if you open up the NuGet Packet Manager, you'll see if you searched for closed XML, the first thing that comes up is the closed XML package. And those are the authors of closed XML and more details about the license. So you just go ahead and install it in your project just like that. You are able to use closed XML. Here's a look back at our code from last time. And this is the OpenXML code. It was a little bit intricate. So for this episode, I've commented out the OpenXML code, and I've added some closed XML code. Let's zoom in on that. All right. Keep in mind when working with closed XML, the rows and the columns, they start at the number 1 and not 0, and that might sound a little strange to some of you out there, but in the programming world, lots of things start at number 0, specifically a list of information or an array. typically would start at number 0, but in this case, with closed XML, a lot of our references begin with 1. Again, we're going to use a using statement to open our spreadsheet, just like we did last time. However, we're not going to use the same class library. We're using the Excel workbook object. Once we have that workbook object, we can grab the worksheet, and we just grab the first worksheet. And once you grab the worksheet, one thing I've done here on that next line of code, on line 260, I've taken that worksheet and I've sorted it by the third column. And in a comment there at the end of that line of code, you can see that we are sorting by the winnings column, and we want to do that in descending order. That is so we get the highest amount first. So once we get our worksheet and we get our worksheet sorted, we can then go ahead and grab the top 3 scores. So we create a simple for loop, you can see starting on line 263. And since in this case we want to index values starting with the number 1, we're going to start this for loop with the number 1 rather than the number 0 like we might usually do. And within that for loop, we're going to use the worksheet object to grab a row. Once we grab the row, we're going to grab properties within the row, which are basically located within each cell. So on those 3 lines of code, you can see we create a row variable, and the next 2 lines, we access cell number 2 and cell number 3 from that row. And that's to get the name of the player and the amount that the player won. So we do a dot value to grab the value, and that is a property of that cell. Finally, with the plus equals operator, we can append information to the return value. So each time we loop through this for loop, we are going to append the text, number, and a space. We're also going to append the variable I, which is going to be the number of the high score. And lastly, we'll append the name of the player and the amount that they won. So after we loop through that information 3 times, we should have, in our string of information, each of those 3 players' names with the amount that they've won. So to test this, what we do at the top, of course, we click on our play button, and we're going to run this on our local host. We don't need to run this on the Amazon Developer Console just yet. Once I open this on the local host, I click on the Get High Scores Intent request. And when I did this the first time, I ended up getting an error. I wasn't sure why, so I set a breakpoint on our little catch there. And the error message that's returned says the process cannot access the file. And we'll scroll even more. Cannot access the file because it is being used by another process. So after a couple of seconds of giving it some thought, I realized, oh yeah, I got the spreadsheet open in Excel, so I just had to close the spreadsheet first. Then I can run my solution, which also needs to open the spreadsheet. So you can't have your solution running with the spreadsheet open. After closing the spreadsheet, rerunning my test, I ran a breakpoint right here on the return variable right before exiting this code block, and you could see as a preview some numbers and some names are being returned, which is great. If we do a full text visualizer on that variable, you can see that the number 1 high score, the number 2 high score, and the number 3 high score are all listed here, and it looks like it's almost complete, but there are still a couple of issues here. You may notice there is no spacing between the number and the word number. And that's something we'll have to clean up. I'll show you why. And that's because once I get this into a state where I am not getting any bugs and I'd like to test it on a real Alexa device, my next step would be to first test it on the Alexa developer console. So I come over and I type Code or Coda, and then I type high scores. And you can see right there what you get back when you say high scores now is that listing of the top 3 high scores. Let's hear what it sounds like when Alexa says it. And I'm surprised she hasn't been speaking because I didn't mute her. Alexa, Code or Coda? I hope this works. We are live.
Welcome to Code or
Hey.
Coda.
Alright, so she said, welcome to Code or Coda. Alexa, high scores. Uh-oh.
Number 1 Jim 10000, number 2 Joe 80000, number 3 Karen 50,000.
Let's try that again. High scores.
Number 1 Jim 10000, number 2 Joe 80000, number 3 Karen 50,000.
Well, it didn't sound great.
Number 1 Jim
Okay,
10000.
Alexa, stop. Wow, thank you, Alexa. Thanks, Alexa.
Number 1 Jim
Alexa.
100.
Uh-oh. Alexa, stop, please.
There was a problem communicating with the requested skill.
Yes, there was, slightly. We'll fix that later. Well, it was close. You can see some of the issues we are having. We would like for those numbers to be represented as dollar amounts, so a little bit more code needs to be written. And that, of course, I'm going to need some help with writing some code. Hopefully some viewers out there will join the Code and Coda team and help us write some code in the GitHub solution. We have some more intent requests to write code for. You can see here in the developer console, I've added some intent requests. Not just high scores here, but we also have low scores, new game, cases remaining, and cases selected. So if you'd like to help us write some code for the solution, join the team. Visit codeandcoda.com and I'll add you to the team. We'll commit the code every Sunday. If you'd like to help, you can go ahead and add in a comma and a space to that string. That's one easy task that needs to be done. Maybe you can even go in and create a get low scores function. Alright, so that's it for part 1. Let's take a quick peek back at Eric. And we'll get started with part 2. We'll talk about how the game is played. I need to say it again. Eric, sounds awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. Well, hey, look at this. We have our 4 players of the game here. We have our player, of course. We have our host. We have our dealer and our case bot. I hope you've seen the game Deal or No Deal on TV before, because that's what we're basing this game off of. So you, the player, will interact with Alexa, the host. There will be a dealer involved with the game, and we're going to create a really neat algorithm to determine the offers that the dealer will be making back to the player. And one other neat feature I'm hoping to implement here is CaseBot. And that's just going to be a neat little way to have the values of the case relayed back to the player. Let's get into that and talk about how all this is going to work. First, we can start with our game board here. Here are 10 briefcases, and each of the 10 briefcases on our game board has a different value within it. You'll see that they start as low as $1 and go all the way up to $1 million, which is the amount of money you as the player are trying to win. One other thing please notice here is that on each case I've also written the code to the case, and that code right there, that binary number, is actually the value of the case. So you'll see over here for the case with $1, it's basically just a bunch of zeros with the 1 at the end. And for the case that has $1 million, you can see it's very different from the other case. It starts with a bunch of 1s. We'll talk about why we're doing that in just a second. But let's go ahead and say, all right, game on. We're starting our game. So the user is now started Code or Coda. Let's see what happens when you go through the first round. There are about 9 steps that we'll be going through here, from the player to Alexa. And then, of course, we have our dealer and our case bot involved in this game. Of course, starting the game will involve invoking the skill by saying Code or Coda, and then the user could say something like new game after that. Just like I said, high scores, we have a new game intent. After the game is started, we'll be playing some intro music. Eric has been working on some music for a couple of weeks now, and we are actually going to be debuting the intro music for the game next week, so join us. And I say next week because that's tentative. Hopefully we'll have it next week. I think we will have it next week. So after the intro music, Alexa, the host, asks the user to choose one of the cases out of the 10 cases, and this case becomes the player's case. And you put that case next to the player. So the first part of the game, Alexa starts the game, plays the intro music, and asks the player to select one case out of the 10. Once Alexa confirms the case has been selected, round 1 starts. And the next step, Alexa asks the user to select 3 cases. So the player selects 3 cases from the remaining cases that are left on the game board. And one at a time, each of the cases or the case values are revealed to the player. Now the way that this is done is the value of the case is relayed to the player as a code, a binary code. Not only are each of the case values relayed to the player as a code, once those 3 cases have been selected, the dealer will offer a deal to the user based on which cases have been eliminated. At this point, we know 3 values of cases that are no longer in the game, which also means that your case, the player's case, cannot be one of those values. So after the dealer comes up with a deal, sends that deal to the player, Alexa will take that deal, known as the code, translate the code into a real dollar value, and then prompt the user with the phrase code or coda. What that means is if the player says code, that means take the value, take the offer, take the amount that the dealer has come up with. Otherwise, if you don't like the offer and you want to continue the game, then you will say coda, and a song is played, and you move on to the next round. That's pretty much the gist of how the game will run. So if we say, sure, the player, we don't know this yet, but the player has chosen the $250,000 case, they now have that case next to them. And the player also has selected 3 cases, so we can see that the $50 case, the $250 case, and the $500,000 case have all been eliminated from the game, and the player knows this, the dealer knows this. So, what does the dealer offer in a situation like this? As the programmer, we need to come up with an algorithm and write some code. So let's come up with a gameplay algorithm. And one pretty important piece of information here that we're going to use to generate our offer is the average value of the cases that remain. That's kind of the simplest way to generate your offer value. Just to sort of not make things so generic and ordinary, and to limit the chances of repeating deals or offers, what we're going to do is add a random number to our algorithm. And then, to simplify it, round that deal to the nearest 5,000. So that's kind of how we're going to come up with our algorithm. There are some other things to consider, such as what are the min and max offer values that should be sent back. We don't want to send back an offer of 1.5 million, of course, because that case doesn't exist. I hope you math nerds out there like this slide. Here is basically taking that algorithm and sort of taking what was done in round 1 here and coming up with an offer. So after round 1, the cases that are left, there are 7 cases left. We add all 7 of those cases up, divide by 7, there's our average value of cases, the 202,000. We're going to incorporate a random number, so let's just pick a number from 1 to 10, and basically we'll just make this a percentage that we add to the offer. In this case, I've just selected the random number 4, which means that we will add about 8,000 to the offer. Once we come back and add those 2 values together and round it out, you'll see that the offer amount, in this case with our algorithm, turns out to be $210,000. And As a player, I don't know this yet, but I have the $250,000 case selected, so this probably wouldn't be such a great deal just yet. Remember, this deal is going to be delivered to the player as a code. The case bot is going to read the code out loud, and also the dealer will read the code out loud when an offer is made. So for the offer of $210,000, this is the code that will be read. A bunch of zeros and ones. Not many people are going to understand what those zeros and ones mean, but that's kind of the way we want it. Why? Well, it will create a little bit of game tension. And that's because listening to 20 digits in a row does take some time. Also, you'll probably get used to the fact that if you hear a number with a lot of zeros at the beginning, it's probably a low number, but if you hear a code that starts with some ones, then that's probably going to be closer to $1 million. And if any of the codes start with the number 1, the minimum value of that will be about $500,000. So that's kind of the clues that you'll be listening in for as you play the game. We're going to be promoting a little bit of learning while we do that. I hope that's okay. And I guarantee you somebody out there is going to learn the binary 20-digit code for the number 1 million after playing this game, which is great. We also get a chance to experiment a little bit and use different speak attributes with Alexa. We'll get into that in another episode. So I guess the most important question now is code or coda? We'll find out when we come back. Alright, I'm checking in on forums right now. I see I have 3 responses to the survey. I'm pretty sure one of them is from Eric. We have a Rolling Stones fan out there. And I'm not sure that I've ever heard of the Borrowers, but that is one of the last live events that somebody's seen out there. Two people don't even realize that there's baseball going on right now. Everybody thinks Pluto is a dog. Nobody has any pull either way if Pluto is a planet or not. Sorry, this is the first time I'm doing this survey, so it's going a little slowly. I apologize. But hey, thank you for submitting that survey. And there goes the music. That's okay. We are almost done with this episode. This is part 3. Let's finish it up. I know it's getting late, so here we go. We're just going to add a simple class to our solution. This is going to be the briefcase, which is a part of our game board. So just quickly, we will add a new CS file to our models folder. And we will give it the name of briefcase. We've all added a class to a Visual Studio project before. This, I'm sure you've seen, this is what you get out of the box, just an empty class. So let's go ahead and add a couple of properties to this class. What are some of the properties that we need for the briefcase? Well, 2 right off the bat that I know we will need is 1, the value of the briefcase. Also, it will be good to know if the briefcase has been selected by the player yet or not. So we add a Boolean property to our briefcase. Boolean, remember, is true or false. So by default, that will be set to false. And as the game is played, we'll set that value to true. Over here in our home controller, I've added a few more lines of code, and you can see at the top I've added a list object, and that is on line 28. That list object I've called game board. That's going to be a list of briefcase objects. All right. And then in the default function for our home controller, you can see on line 34, I've created a new object called briefcase, a new briefcase object. I've set the value to 1 for $1, and I've set the selected property to false by default, and have added that briefcase to the game board by using the list function add. So there we go, we have 1 briefcase added to our game board. What does that look like? Well, if I come in and debug, you can see our game board is basically an array of objects. Our first briefcase there with a value of 1 is in that list. Now, what happens if I want to add another briefcase to the list? Well, we need to add 10 briefcases to our list. So what I've done on line 40 is I've taken our original briefcase object, I've changed the value to 10, and then I've added that briefcase object to the game board. After adding that second briefcase to the game board, I ran the debugger and I created a breakpoint right before leaving that block of code just to see what the game board looked like at this point, and you can see that there are now 2 objects within that game board because we've added 2 briefcases to the game board. But have we? Some of you programmers out there might be wondering, what is the value of each of those briefcases that have been added to the game board? The first briefcase we added had a value of 1. The second briefcase we added had a value of 10. So if we go into our game board and look at the values of each of those briefcases, it should say 1 and 10. But we're not going to do that this episode. We'll do this in the next episode. We'll see what really happened when we reused the briefcase object and added that object a second time to the list. Even though we have 2 briefcase objects in the list, we don't quite have exactly what we're looking for. So come back next week. We will be back and we will start the first part of our source episode. And that just means we're going to be writing a lot more code. We're going to finish up creating our game board. And we're also going to create a process for sessionizing our game data. And that is so we can go from round 1 to round 2 to round 3 and keep track of all of the briefcases that have been selected by the user. We'll also have a little bit of fun with speech and what we return to Alexa when somebody gets a value or a code returned to them. We'll also debut the theme song for Code or Coda, so I hope you can join us next week. Again, this is Code and Coda, streaming live from Boston, Mass. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sticking with us. Have a good night, everybody. Happy Labor Day.